everybody. Welcome to the Universal Church of Truth. This is a special bonus episode where we are talking about Dr. Michael Morbius and his first feature film that has just hit theaters, unfortunately. I am one of your two co-hosts, Hunter, and this is...
Mary. Yes.
Yeah, Mary. I hope I'm pointing to the right.
You might not.
It doesn't matter. So, Mary, what did you think about Sony's Morbius film?
I mean, the word that comes to mind is no. Like, I just don't know where to go. It was bad, and I think everybody knows that. But when I hear, like, oh, a film's bad, everyone hates it, like, that means some of it's entertaining just because it's bad and you want to watch a train wreck kind of thing. That wasn't even the case. It wasn't even fun, boring. Like, it wasn't even, they did something so horribly wrong that it's like, ha ha ha, that's so terrible. It's just, I don't know how to describe it. It was boring. It was the plot. Was it a plot? I don't know. I did like the special effects when he would do whatever action scene he was doing. I don't know what to call that, but it almost kind of looked like a watercolor thing going on. That I did like. That was about it. So
Yeah, yeah, so I wrote a review that was published this morning. Everybody watching, go read it. Yeah, where I kind of said the same thing, where this very much felt like a movie that it was a manufactured like factory line film. Like, it felt like things were happening, and on paper they were things that might have even been some good ideas. Like, there were certain plot points and certain ideas that I thought, like, if someone were to make a standalone Morbius movie, this isn't the worst idea they've ever had. It's just the execution felt so hollow. Like, things were just happening for the sake of happening.
mm-hmm.
Like I mentioned in some social media and whatnot that like, there were major plot points that were going on in this movie that just sort of, they just happened. Like, this is what I keep going back to, like, it just happened. That's all I can describe it as. Like, there was no setup. There's very little payoff. Like, major characters were dying really fast, sort of off screen. Like, and I mean, spoilers to anyone watching this. Or just watch this and don't watch the movie, that you might be better off. But like, the end of that movie, they kill off two major supporting characters like back to back,
Mm-hmm.
and there's like no time to mourn either of them. And then it just goes right into the final battle. Like, it was nuts. It was crazy times.
I just feel like there's something missing. I don't know if missing's even the right word. But I feel like most films that you see, even if it's like direct to TV or it's in theaters or it's anything in between, they know how to do basic, like, proper editing in terms of, like, okay, if he's talking here, maybe don't edit to a picture of him like just pacing around while he's still talking and then come back and then he's also on a boat in the same edited shot. That's weird. But and and there's just certain things, and I'm not a filmmaker. I'm sure it's very hard. And this made me realize the people who even make, like, Venom, let's say. Like, I don't hate Venom, but I know it's not like a great movie.
But you're impressed that someone made it watchable.
It made me, like, really appreciate, like, they knew how to, like, make a basic film. Like, there was plot, there was basic, like, excitement. Like, they knew how to build something and then have, like, oh, this is a moment where things happen, and then you do some stuff. Oh, there's a moment, there's a climax. Like, just like high school film class kind of stuff. Like, it just felt like Morbius did not know how to do that, or if they didn't want to, it was still horrible. I don't.
I found myself wondering how much of that was actually, like, Daniel Espinosa, like the director and the creative team and the writers, the people who wrote the script, how much of the train wreck are they responsible for, and how much of that movie was, like, tampered with and edited by Sony to a point where, like, scenes they directed or edits they made or transitions they had before had to get lost to make room for something else, and then, like, it all fell apart. Because I mean, that's happened before, but it's like you said, like, it really feels like something is missing. Like, the movie is playing, and the whole time I'm watching it, it just feels like there's some element of movie making that's not happening over the course of that 2 hours, and it's kind of hard to pinpoint it.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's a great way to put it.
But I mean, we saw like in the trailers, there's all these scenes with Adrian Toomes that aren't in the final product. I mean, he's in the after credit scene, which they're now following in the Venom tradition of just putting the after credit scene in the trailer. But like, was that always the after credit scene? Were there originally more Adrian Toomes scenes in the beginning? Was it originally completely different? Like, we don't know. We may never know. We may get a really fun like tell all in a couple years. I don't. I have no idea. But like, it really does feel like there might have been too many cooks in the kitchen. Like, I hesitate to put all the blame on one person because
Yeah.
it feels like this was not it wasn't a creatively driven movie. Like I said, it felt so manufactured. Like it doesn't feel like a director sat down and was like, "This is my movie. I directed it. I've created it." It feels way more like this was like a board of directors were like, "What is a comic book movie like? What are plot points that are supposed to happen? We're gonna throw those together." It's like this movie is like if an alien, like when aliens come down to Earth in movie, not in real life, but in movies and TV shows, when when they come down to Earth and they're like pretending to be people and they're technically speaking words that a person would say, but it just feels off. Like you're like, okay, you said a full correct sentence, but nobody talks like that. Like that's what this movie felt like. It felt like aliens came down and they watched a bunch of comic book movies and they were like, "Oh, this is what comic book movies are." And then they like pushed this out. And now it's out there and we just have to sit with it.
Yeah, it is. It is out there. I went with my dad. So I
Mm-hmm.
went really because it was an excuse to like hang out with my dad. Like I wasn't otherwise gonna go, to be honest. Um, he's like traditional, like he's like 71. Like he's old guy who sits in the basement, watches like these generic like action or sci-fi movies and doesn't care. So
Right.
like, normally kind of up his alley. He walked out in the middle of the first credit scene, like not even like before it or after, like in the middle of it. Like he's watching Michael Keaton appear and he's just like, I'm just done.
It's like this is too much. I thought stop
I
force
didn't
feeding.
actually see the second one in theaters. I saw it online, so I know what it was, but I didn't even make it to the end of the credits. But
That those credit scenes were something special. Like the amount of things that just don't line up or that they went back on or that just don't make sense is insane. Like absolutely insane. We can go. I mean, we'll get to the after credit scenes in a second because I think they deserve to be talked about. But yeah, like so for my movie going experience with this, I went to the AMC Lincoln Center in New York City in the IMAX theater there. So it's like one of the true IMAX theaters on the East Coast. And I like to go see all of the like big comic book movies there because you're gonna get if the movie's gonna get a big reaction from a crowd, it'll happen there, and like it's good audio quality, all that annoying film buff stuff. And I went and the theater was like half full, which makes sense because it was like an earlier showing, but just the reactions, like there was a guy sitting next to me in the theater who was there with his friend, girlfriend. I don't know what their relationship was, but they were sitting together and she had like not seen comic book movies. Like she was like, "Yeah, this is like the first comic book movie I'm seeing in the theater." And he was like, "This is related to the Spider-Man universe." And he got all excited. He explained like the entire plot of No Way Home. He was pumped. This guy was into it. And I was nervous for them and whatever relationship that they had like before the movie started. And the movie is playing, and at the beginning he's like, "That's Dr. Michael Morbius," or like, "Yeah, like I saw like," he's a very excited gentleman. And like as the movie went on, this guy just like slowly stopped. Like I was feeling the excitement drain. I saw someone pull out their phone. Like they were not into it.
calling
And
for
the
help. Yeah.
calling for help,
Uh-huh.
trying to get out of whatever date they were on. And when the movie ended, he would like everyone in my entire row, we just sat there speechless because and the speechlessness wasn't out of a sense. I feel like I'm being really dramatic right now, and there are probably some people watching this like, wow, this guy is really going at it. But this is like 100% true. We all just sat there and it was silence for a second, and it wasn't that palpable silence after a good movie when you're like, oh, that was crazy and I'm still processing. It was like, is that it? Like, we were still waiting for whatever missing piece that was in the movie to like magically show up during the credits and like fix everything, because we were like, there's no way that that was it. um and then the girl looked at the guy and was like, that sucked. He was like, yeah. And then they got up and left. And like, yeah, I was just like, wow, that's really sad. It's a really sad way for that to end. But yeah, similar vibes. The credits started rolling and there was no excitement in the air. There was no, the vibes were not there at
Yeah.
all.
My theater was actually like pretty packed, like not like sold out packed, I don't think, but I did go to one of those movie theaters. I never do this for comic book movies ever. I always go to IMAX, but I knew this one was bad, so I didn't want to fuck with it. And so I went to like, I don't know if you have, they're all over the country, but the Alamo Draft House.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
totally one of those. So I just kind of like ate my way through it, which was nice. It's a coping mechanism for that movie. But I mean, it was full, and like when the credits started rolling, like every single person in that theater like stayed in their seat, which I was surprised because usually there's always half the theater has no idea because they've never seen a movie before and someone took them. But I'm like, sorry guys.
Yeah. The Alamo is probably a good place to watch because you can drink at the Alamo too.
Yeah,
So that's probably what I would have been doing. If you go into the Alamo and you tell them what movie you're seeing, they're like, "What movie are you seeing?" And you say Morbius, they just give you like 3 free shots right off the top. They're like, "You're
good
gonna
idea.
need it." um, yeah. I mean, while we're on the topic, let's talk about those after credit scenes because I guess potentially they're kind of a big deal, like technically speaking,
Yeah,
but they don't like I it would be weird if you never mentioned them again, but I also would love to pretend they didn't exist.
yeah. I mean, they're clearly. I assume Sony intends for them to be important. I don't know if like
Right.
I'd like to think sometimes they would look in a mirror, the whole corporation looking in one mirror and going, like maybe we should, change course here. I don't think they'll do that. So, but yeah, he just popped up in a different universe, just in an empty cell, got out, wanted to
Which
form the Sinister Six, just ready to go
which
for it.
like first of all, why did he so
Oh, that
the
makes
rules of the spell established in No Way Home are that anyone who knows Peter Parker is Spider-Man have been pulled to the MCU. And
mhm.
then at the end, the people who were in there got booted back to their universe,
Yeah,
which explains how like Venom. Well, maybe it doesn't explain Venom. Oh yeah, because
it kind
yeah,
of. I mean,
it kind of does a little bit. You can like maybe fudge that one enough, but it doesn't explain how Adrian Toomes, who originated in the MCU, got booted out of it
yeah,
at
no,
the end.
no.
And then when he shows up in a different prison, he's just like totes chill with it.
He's so cool about it. He's like, I don't care that I have a wife and at least one kid, back in my first universe.
Yeah,
He's like, I don't care, I'm out of jail.
and I guess you could say like he
Hope the food's
comes from,
better in this joint.
yeah, I hope the food's better in this joint, which I don't know, maybe it's clearly a lot easier to get out of that prison than any of the ones in the MCU.
Yeah.
But um yeah, so he ends up back there, totally cool with it. I mean, he comes from a universe where magic is a thing. So I guess hypothetically you could say that he's like, "Oh, this is probably magic," and was fine with it. But also like magic has never happened to him, so
Yeah.
whatever. He's
Yeah.
totally chill with it. They let him out, and then somehow, some way, he ends up with an upgraded vulture suit, which the guy who made his again, if we really, really want to do a lot of the work for Sony, you could say he found a guy. Maybe Phineas Mason exists in this universe too, and he found like this universe's Phineas
Maybe
Mason.
there's already another Adrian Toomes, and he just found that guy.
Yeah, and
Maybe,
they
maybe it is the other guy. And so we've got two. We've got
now we got 2 Adrian Toomes. The Sinister Six is just 6 different Adrian Toomes.
and that's part of my thing. It's like I get Sony only owns so many characters, and I get Spider-Man, so like that's big. That's a big character to own the rights to.
Right.
Cool. But and I get the Sinister Six is like a cool concept to build up, but like, why do we want to see countless movies of anti-hero but not anti-hero villains who we know are all going to be real villains to fight the person we actually like, which might be Andrew Garfield, right? Like, it just
Right.
seems like the payoff won't make sense either. Like, it just
Yeah. Well, Sony is looking at the money that movies are making now, but all of their data is stuck in the mid to late 2000s. So like they still think that people are really into like the anti-hero concept in general, which is cool like in doses, but if that's your main thing, like that's a whole different thing. But yeah, I mean, listen, if that you were going to take any Marvel character and give him his own like side spin-off universe like within another cinematic universe, which is a crazy thing to even think about in the first place, but Spider-Man like is the one you would do that with because his comics kind of exist on their own like in the Marvel comics as well. So like you could do that. And Morbius isn't even that far-fetched of a character to get his own spin-off movie because I mean I personally think he works better with Spider-Man or with Blade or whatever, but you could feasibly take the Morbius concept and give it its own movie. But like they're just trying so hard to make things their own thing but also connect it, but they don't really know what Marvel's doing and they don't really care. It comes down to like people trash talk Marvel Studios all they want to, but Marvel Studios at the very least seems to like care about their storytelling, like at least a little bit, and about the characters they have and making a cohesive universe. And Sony is a lot more, we just want this movie to make money. And
yeah.
we made the mistake of telling them it was okay to do that by giving the Venom movies a lot of money. And now they're like, we'll do it. This will work every time. It doesn't
I
matter.
know. No, I it's just wild. And it's just people. To be fair, like people, not all people. Like there are people genuinely into Morbius. Like they exist, and
Oh,
I'm sure,
yeah.
right? Yeah, and but I think so many people go because they hear it's a Marvel movie. Because I've
Hmm.
had so many. My dad was asking me, he's like, "So is this like a Marvel movie?" And I was like, "Kinda, like you gotta give them a distinction." And then I've had friends ask me the same thing. I'm like, there's, and now the distinction with No Way Home is harder because it's like, okay, so they were never connected at all, and now it's like technically they can. So, but a lot of people I think flock to it because they think somehow it does have something to connect with the MCU or Spider-Man. But right now, Sony doesn't like
Right.
have their own Spider-Man.
Right.
But
They just keep referencing, which I mean, to go back to the end credit scenes, Adrian Toomes goes up to Morbius and he's like, "Yeah, I bet Spider-Man had something to do with this." And Morbius is like, "Yep, for sure. I know who that is. I know why we don't like him." Despite this whole movie about me being like, I'm only going to use my powers for good, which we never really got even a resolution to. He was like, the last time we heard him talk about it, he's like, I got 4 hours left and then I'm going to be a monster. And then he like flies away as a vampire. And you're like, but are you like gonna kill people? I don't know. And then the after credit scenes, he's like, yeah, intriguing. Like, I will join the Sinister Six. You're like, okay, but why? Like, why is any of this happening? And why is Adrian Toomes suddenly want to kill Spider-Man? Like, his whole thing. And even if he doesn't remember that Peter is Spider-Man anymore, if that, like, or who Peter Parker is or whatever, he would still remember that Spider-Man, like, saved his life
yeah,
and saved his daughter's life and might still have some respect there, but they're just like forcing these weird, it's so weird. It's baffling. Like it's breathtaking that these things are happening. I'm getting really worked up about it. But um yeah, I mean kind of a Marvel movie, kind of not a Marvel movie. Morbius in the comics is an interesting character. I will say this to him. Like him having fans of his own, that makes sense to me because he is kind of neat. I mean, the whole living vampire thing, the idea that he's a guy who accidentally gave himself vampire powers without any of the weaknesses per se, aside from like the bloodlust and whatnot, um, which is a pretty big con if you ask me. But uh, like that's interesting. I almost wish. Did you ever watch the '90s animated Spider-Man show?
no,
Okay, so I love that show. I grew up with that show, and their twist on Morbius to this day is still one of my favorite takes. And they connect him with Spider-Man by saying that he is a student, like he's like a fellow college student. He's like a transfer student or whatever with Spider-Man, Michael Morbius, and they share some like the same love interests. You know, they have that Spider-Man always has a personal connections to his villains, unless they're starting in a Sony movie first, apparently. Um, but they take that and they make that the personal connection between the two, and then Morbius uses like an experiment they're doing at the college to try to cure his own blood issues. And then he becomes Morbius. And then his whole thing is he's like in love with this other student. And I mean, it's the same internal conflict of like, I don't want to kill people, but I'm killing people. And then when Spider-Man is like, oh my God, like that's Michael, Peter is like, that's Michael Morbius. Like, I know that kid. He's in my class. Like, we fought over the same girl, but I don't want to see him out here slaughtering people. I think he needs help. And then Spider-Man goes to try to help him, and then it becomes this whole like recurring season long arc where they like go back and forth, and Peter's just trying to help Michael, and Michael's like succumbing in and out to his like vampiric tendencies, and it's really good. And he has sucky hands instead of teeth because that show was like really weirdly censored. But I always felt like it would have been cool if maybe they did a Spider-Man Morbius movie, or even like, I mean, we know that Marvel is supposedly doing like Halloween specials now. Like, even if that was like a fun little Halloween special, and then Morbius like spun out of it, and you had a stronger connection. But
Yeah. But no, we got, I don't even know how long it was. Was it over 2 hours? Was
it
it?
was like an hour 40
It was under
something.
2 hours.
Yeah, it didn't feel like it. It was a little too
Did
painful
not
for
feel like that. Also, that's
that.
great for superhero. I guess Venom was like really short. Venom 2 at least was super short.
Yeah.
I guess props to them on that. I don't know.
It was like just
Yeah.
under 2 hours, yeah.
Wow. Huh. That blows my mind a little bit. It really does.
Here,
Wow.
you talk about it. I'm gonna Google. I'm gonna do the like podcast producer thing where I Google
Okay.
Morbius length. Hold
I
on.
feel like
Whoo! Hour 44.
there you go.
Yeah.
There you go. I mean, I guess props to that. Then I didn't have to watch like 45 minutes more of that. But I don't feel like I have to. Um, it was so. I wish it was bad in a fun way. Like you could be
Yeah.
like, oh, haha. Like there's just not so many places to point to. You can be well, you can point to a lot of places and say that was bad, but you can't be like, I don't know if that makes any sense. You can't like enjoy how bad it was. It was just so like lifeless.
Right.
Um, God, the one of the weirdest like edits I remember was he went and he transformed for the first time on that boat.
Yes.
And then, I mean, first of all, normally when you see like the first transformation, it's like a big thing, but he's just like slowly crawling on the ceiling for a while.
It's so funny.
Anyway,
That's the one good funny one. Yeah,
yeah,
I mentioned that in my review where you're like, oh, he's about to turn into Morbius for the first time, and you think it's gonna be a big thing, and then she like turns to talk to some guy and turns back, and he's just like not in the chair anymore, and he's like on the ceiling.
he kills what, 8 dudes, I think is the number.
Yeah.
Big important number. But and so it's like this whole thing, big battle, and he kind of like passes out, and it goes to a shot of the boat just on the water. I'm like, okay, that's a normal transition scene. So I'm like, no, and it just goes right back to him passed out on the boat, slowly
Mhm.
waking up. And I just that played out so weird too. I'm like, you can't even like divvy up your scenes well. Like I
Yeah.
don't know. It was odd.
Well, okay, so you said, I think we talked about it even before we started recording. You said that you're not super familiar with Morbius as a character. So as someone who doesn't know a ton about Morbius, maybe just knows like tangentially some things about him, and you went into this movie, and this movie was supposed to serve as your like introduction to the character, really, as like a mainstream being. What do you take away from it about Morbius as a character? Like, do you think he's interesting? Do you think he has potential to be interesting?
I mean, I think there is potential. I don't think, and I think part of that potential is just obviously, and I know it came from a comic, but I don't really know the comics at all. That's fair. But obviously, there's an idea that people want to share and think it's a good story to tell, and I get it. I feel like there are tons of vampires everywhere, so sometimes I feel like I have vampire fatigue. but that's
Right.
fine. And it was interesting. I don't know if I liked the fact that his ultimate enemy was his friend. Like, I get it. Kind of look at yourself as a vampire, kind of compared to someone else who was in your shoes, and like, how do you handle who you are in that situation? Like, I get that, but I wish they would have played up more Morbius's own issues with it, because he was very much, he's like, oh, the artificial blood's great. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I can only last 15 minutes now, but like, it's fine, and we never got to a point where like he really, really had to make that decision. He did drink the blood, Martine, but that was like a she's already dead situation. You got to go fight this guy. He never really
Yeah.
resolved that of, okay, now I'm gonna have to drink real blood. Um, but no, I think the character is interesting. I think the transformation from his illness to just being jacked, I think that's a lot, which is fine, but it's kind of like, okay, I wish we saw more of because there's still ramifications of the fact that he had that for so long, and then that's the life
Right.
he lived. But it kind of just like, okay, well, nope, he can jump on
And
now.
I
But
think a lot of what you're saying is why Morbius works so well as the tragic antagonist, and not quite as well as the like anti-hero protagonist.
yeah,
Because as a character, he's a lot more interesting when you have someone like Spider-Man who knows Michael, and Peter Parker without like golden heart, and he like what he just as much as you wants Michael to fight it and be a hero more than anyone else, because that's who Spider-Man is, and like that's what he's trying to do. And watching Michael fight himself for like the first half of the story, and you not trying to fight Spider-Man, recognizing Spider-Man as a hero or whatever, whoever I mean, even in a Blade movie it'd be like a similar story. um and the moment when he's not able to fight it and like succumbs to drinking the blood, or even vice versa, like the moment when he does beat it, and like you said, it maybe that's the thing that was missing from this movie, what you just said. The main conflict for Michael is that he's trying to like fight off, trying to stave off his hunger for the whole movie, and he never really has to deal with that. Like, he has the artificial blood, there is no resolution to that. He drinks Martine's blood at the end, but there's never like a point in the movie where he's like, I am Morbius, which again, at the end there kind of is, but it doesn't feel earned. Like, it's just happening because it's supposed to happen, but there was no like moment where the audience is like feeling it with him.
yeah, no, no. Okay, and maybe we need to say, maybe this isn't for right this second, but it just came to my mind. Why on earth would all of his bats attack the other vampire? Because didn't the bats like him in the
Right.
first
And
place because he
the
was a vampire like them, and he's just like, go get the other
the
vampire.
rules are not clearly established, and it really comes into force in the end where he's like, I feel a kinship with them because they know I'm part bat. So yeah, like technically that should apply to the other guy, but they're like, no, we like this guy better.
Yeah, I know.
And then he's got much better vibes than you, Milo. And then it made me upset at the end with Martine too, when he sucks her blood, and they make this whole, well, as big of a deal as that movie is capable of, out of her death. And then at in the end, like randomly thrown in there, it's her waking up and like she's a vampire, like a living vampire now or whatever it is. But no one else who got attacked by the vampires woke back up and became vampires. So why her?
That we know of.
And you could say,
Morbius
yeah, that we know
2,
of, I guess.
all of
That's
the
Morbius 2, Vampire
he
Boogaloo.
killed one vampire, chance to kill at least
let's
one
pitch
more.
let's pitch Morbius 2, Vampire Boogaloo. I'm really excited about that one. Uh Yeah, no, it baffles my mind because the only thing is, like, in the movie, there's a line where like one of the news anchors is like, they're doing what they show the footage of Milo, and then Tyrese's like completely pointless character is like, they spread, or maybe it was his partner, one of them, and but he was talking about Milo specifically, and we know that Milo didn't get those powers from a bite. He stole the
Yeah.
Krabby Patty formula and used it on himself, and
Yep.
like I yeah, it's bad. It doesn't make sense. Why is no one else becoming vampires, but she becomes a vampire? Is it the power of love in his teeth or
It's
something?
power. Yeah.
It's the power of love, but
Everybody knows that's a bat power with
right.
a lot of love.
That's what I mean with this movie just doing thing like there's no rules. It's just doing what it's doing for the sake of what it wants to do next, which is really weird.
A way you phrased something earlier was if you want to do the work for Sony. And it's like, but we shouldn't have to. But it's
No,
a
we
good point. Like
shouldn't.
you could in a lot of situations. Like you could say, I don't know how, in theory, in the past, Morbius has worked in the comics or just vampires in general, always because it can shift. But maybe he didn't drink all of her blood, and that's a thing. If they drink everyone's blood, they don't. I don't know. But like
Yeah.
it may be something like that. But it's like, yeah, why are we having to figure out the rules of
Yeah.
Marvel, Sony Spider-Man universe vampirism?
Exactly. Exactly. Especially when like especially when Marvel is about it's just the sigh of like frustration. Marvel is about to introduce their own vampire, like the MCU's rules about vampire and Blade. And one of the things that made Morbius an interesting, conflicting character with Blade in the comics is that he was like Morbius was like the only other like daywalker per se in the maybe not the only other, but like one of the only other like major daywalker characters. So it's like whereas Blade's one up on the other vampires was that he didn't have their weaknesses, is like Morbius doesn't either. And then they make a point of that in the movie where she's like testing if the light hurts him
Yeah.
and it doesn't hurt him. And that's like where it becomes. In fact, actually, in the comics, this is where my expertise comes into play. Uh Blade is born with the like I think they ended up retconning this after the Blade movies made his like quote unquote newer origin story a lot more popular, but originally Blade is born like a pseudo vampire, but his whole thing is that he like can't be turned by vampire bites or something. I might be wrong about that. I don't know it 100%, but like he's not fully like a daywalker vampire like we see in the movies. In the comics, that doesn't happen for the character until like the 90s or maybe it's like the late 80s or something. And Morbius bites Blade, and Morbius turns Blade into like a living vampire, like a daywalker. But then that just became because Blade is exponentially more popular. That just became primarily attributed to Blade instead of Morbius.
Mm-hmm.
Yada yada yada. But like Blade and Morbius, I mean, they've been partners on the Midnight Suns. They've been, they fought each other via like possessions and all that fun comic booky stuff. But yeah, like Morbius technically, I mean, he's called the living vampire because he was the OG like daywalker. I have all of the powers of a vampire, but none of their weaknesses character. Whereas Blade was just like a super skilled vampire hunter who couldn't be turned by their bites, and that was his leg up. Was he didn't have to worry about them biting him. But like yeah, so there is that relationship there, but now if the rules are different in the Sony verse and then the MCU, and then you want to connect them down the line, and I'm sure, absolutely positive that Sony has already contacted Kevin Feige about like a potential Blade crossover down the line. Like, there's no way they haven't thought about that cash grab, and it's gonna be weird and confusing, and I don't know, maybe they used the multiverse to explain away some problems, but yeah.
It's almost kind of like, and DC is much worse about this. JJ would freak out if I said DC is bad at anything, but
That one's for you, JJ. I was thinking it when you said it too.
but like, with DC, and you have their like CW stuff, you have their HBO Max TV shows now, you got their HBO Max movies, you got their Snyder verse, you got the other
Yeah,
DCU, and it's like you got just the Batman over here doing his own thing. It's
Joker.
just so much. And I mean, people who pay attention to it all the time, like we do, even if it's
Mhm.
not on purpose, like it's just around, like we kind of understand it. But people who aren't caring as much and they just want to watch stuff,
Civilians.
they just don't, they have no idea. They're probably watching The Flash on the CW and they're like, why isn't the same guy in this movie? Like, is it just recasted? Like, what's going on here? And they're like, but now, and Marvel's a little different because it's basically MCU and Sony at this point. There's
Right.
not much else. You don't have the Fox's X-Men anymore. But it's kind of a similar thing of people going expecting it to be, quote, an Avengers movie,
Hmm.
which obviously the MCU is larger than that now, but that's how a lot of people still think of it. But it gets confusing, and it gets confusing if they every once in a while want to do some tiny crossover for a cash grab, and then it's like, what are the implications of that?
Yeah.
Well, is the Sony Verse in the MCU technically because of No Way Home? I'm going to say no because I don't want it to be, but it's a multiverse. But it's not the
Yeah.
multiverse that we
I
want
mean,
to be in the multiverse. Like,
yeah.
it's just,
It's probably like a variant timeline, like within the minds of like Kevin Feige. He probably considers it like a variant
yeah.
timeline to like the, whatever. And that's why they can like hop back and forth. But yeah, no, I agree. It gets really weird and confusing, and there's certain like, obviously I think the Batman is a good example of like what you can do when you're not held back by the, having it's supposed to be within a certain universe, and like this universe feels like this and it has this tone or whatever. But if you are going to be so hell-bent on connecting it, like at least try a little bit. A little bit. Gosh, what we were just talking about like Blade and stuff. I feel like this will be another fun edit for Charles V. What were you just talking about? The
I was just talking about how, with all the Sony stuff happening, how
right.
it's just starting to get, like, I don't find it confusing, but a lot of people do. Anyone I speak to, because I don't know anybody in real life, by the way, side fact, that knows shit about any of the stuff that I like. So I literally can't talk to anyone about it. It's kind of sad.
Yeah.
But so I've probably explained the Sony MCU distinction like 8 times in the past 3 days. And that's
Right.
fine. I enjoy that. But people just don't get it because it doesn't make sense on the surface. It's not like the trailers say, hey, we're Sony. This is our character. Come watch this
Yeah.
movie.
Oh, I
Don't
got it.
expect this.
Yeah, it was I heard everything you said. It was just a certain point I had in my brain that went away as soon as you were done. I was like, gosh darn it. Yeah, 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 yeah. So that you said that like a lot of people don't seem to know like the distinction. Like they just know, they see Marvel at the beginning of the trailer, right? And they're like, okay, so this is a Marvel movie, an Avengers movie. Based on interviews, it really seems like there was more than one cast member of this movie who maybe thought when they signed up for it that like it was an MCU movie. I mean, you had like Tyrese going around, and he said on multiple occasions that he kept calling it an MCU movie, and he kept saying that his character was a superhero, which his character literally has like 5 scenes in the whole movie, and he just talks mysteriously. He never uses that big fun cyborg arm that he was talking about, which goes back to like how many edits of this movie are there? Did he
Yeah.
fight Morbius at some point? And you had Matt Smith talking about how he doesn't know anything about comic book movies, but he like had a Marvel movie pitched to him, and he called Karen Gillan because he knows her from Doctor Who, and she was like, "Oh, you should do it." And it's like, does that mean that he thought it was an MCU movie and he thought he was going to be like in a movie with Karen, or that it was like the same producers she worked with? Did she think it was an MCU movie and that's why she was like, "Yeah, you should do it." Like I feel like the people involved with the movie also were still like 50-50 on whether
Yeah,
or
I
not.
do that. I
Yeah.
just, because I mean, a lot of people involved aren't even like the necessarily, I'm sure some of them are, but the biggest of fans, like the people who like, spend all their time on Twitter talking about it kind of thing. Like
Yeah.
they aren't thinking about it as much either. So they're probably like, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That like, and they don't question. I'm sure Matt Smith was like, "Yeah, this is like a good paycheck," and like Karen told me comic book movies were fun to do, probably because Karen has mostly worked with like James Gunn and like the Guardians crew, which I'm sure
Yeah.
is a blast a lot of the time. And like he just hopped onto set sometimes and like filmed his scenes and then like dipped. They put a bunch of CGI on his face. I will say, visually speaking, if we were gonna have like another character who just has the same face as Morbius, it was kind of nice that they at least had them dressed differently. Like I did kind of like visually that Matt Smith's character was like, I'm still gonna just dress like Doctor Who but with a Morbius face, and then like it was
Yeah.
kind of fun, like because the action scenes, there were a few shots from the action scenes where I was like, okay, that's kind of cool. I don't know why they had like smoke coming off of them whenever they flew around. That was weird.
That was the one thing I liked. I don't know
I
what
know.
it was more interesting than everything else going on. Like kind of like there's something not trippy about it, but just something a
I
little
was trying
artsy. I don't know.
to I was trying to rationalize it in my head, and I was like, maybe it's like that's like other people don't see the smoke, and to them that's just like the echolocation, like trailing off
Yeah.
of them or
I
something.
I think so. But you're doing work for Sony now. So
yeah, exactly. Like again, we're
accept
doing
it.
the work for Sony, and it was
I
just
like
weird.
the way it looked. And they did it nonstop though. I mean, they could have been a little bit more.
Yeah. And then mind you, like Morbius at the end, he finally puts on his like Morbius-esque, like he's wearing like a black trench coat with like a popped collar, and he has like the longer black hair, and like it looks the most like comic book Morbius he's looked the whole movie. And this killed me. They went through the effort to give him like a colored lining inside his jacket, so when he was fighting and when he like was doing the cool smoke flights and whatnot, he had like a color associated like with the black, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why is it purple? Google Morbius. Google any
I saw you mention it.
basic
I just looked
picture.
yesterday, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, what? Maybe there's a comic I'm missing where he did wear purple or whatever, but like every every like generic picture of Morbius you could legally put on something without getting sued is like he's got the black and the red. And I was waiting for the red lining in the jacket, and they finally did it, and it was purple. I was like, why is it purple?
The
I was confused.
purple, because he wasn't fully drinking
The red. He hadn't embraced the
the
red.
red. So yeah,
The
that was their
red.
way of saying this
Oh,
is purple Morbius. Next time,
drinking the red, are you?
you'll
Yeah.
agree.
Drinking the red, Morbius. Yeah.
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 Oh man.
I. Yeah. Just a lot of questions. So many questions. Yeah, Milo, Jared Harris's character was in there. I mean, it is true in the comics that Morbius does like he comes from Greece, and in the comics, I think it was a single like he had a mom instead of a father figure who he I don't think she was around that long, but I don't know. It felt like without Spider-Man or Blade or like the characters to bounce him off of, they had to invent a lot of things with stuff in the comics that was very minor, like his time in Greece or Martine, who is in the comics but is not like they obviously had to stretch some things about her to make it like work with the movies or like uh Nicholas was like I'm pretty sure a character they made up. Milo Lucian was originally Matt Smith was announced as they were going to do that Venom thing where they take a very minor villain like Riot and they just like make him the main. He was like Luxius Crown, aka Hunger. And then after they cast him, the script changed so much that they just like renamed him a totally original character, and like yeah, so I don't know. Like they were stretching stuff out from the comics, which can work if your creative team is allowed to have fun with it or like make it a real movie. But they just did. They're like, yeah, this will work. Throw some names on it. Like yada yada yada. Bada bing, bada boom. We got a vampire movie, and like ah.
Part of me wonders because obviously was famous for being delayed. Like
Yeah.
it just every 2 weeks it got delayed for a while. I wonder if there are people who obviously had seen the final cut, however many times that changed, but who knew what the movie was for so long for these years, and they knew it was bad, and they've just been sitting waiting for this moment for people to tell them how bad it was. Or the opposite, I guess, if they've been waiting this long to be told it was a masterpiece, and now it's just like they're getting ripped apart.
I keep going back to the director and being like, did he know? Like when he was giving that interview where he was just dropping spoilers like on Twitter and stuff, like did he know? Was he like this movie is terrible anyway and like I'm just going to spoil it on Twitter and dip and like make a different thing and never talk about it again? Or was he sitting there thinking I have made like a top tier comic book movie. People are going to love this. I can't wait for people to see it. Like I don't know, like how does it get that far and everyone is like, yeah, we should just still drop this and promote it, and like Jared Leto's out there like, yeah, this is great, I'm Morbius, it's gonna be me for like the foreseeable future. Like I don't understand. I don't get it.
I mean, at a certain point, they already made it.
Yeah.
So they're gonna release it, but yeah, like it seems like, and I know it's not how budget works and everything and schedules, but like in theory, there was enough time to maybe do something a little better, but it just doesn't seem like they tried. If anything, they just
It's
put in some shitty post-credit scenes that were like the
yeah.
worst thing possible, even compared to the rest of the movie.
It's
Like,
like It's like when you finish a homework assignment and you screwed it up, and you're like, I could write another essay, but I already wrote this one, and I've kind of accepted that it's not good. I'm gonna get a bad grade. So let's just turn it in, and maybe we'll be surprised. Maybe my teacher loves it, you know? But the teacher did not love it. I feel like that was the vibe. It's like they're like, we wrote this essay, and technically we could write another essay, but we really don't want to. So let's just hope this is fine.
Yeah. And no, it was just so boring. I mean, that's the worst part. It was so generic. It was like the generic of generic. And it was like a vampire. Like that should increase your generic a little bit. 'Cause it's not like Superman. It's not like the classic, just generic guy in a
Yeah.
punch and stuff. It's a little different, but no. It really did. I've seen some reviews say it felt more like it was from like the early 2000s. And I'm like, yeah, yeah.
Well, and I mean, so did the Venom movies. Like that, like I feel like that's even the I just rewatched the Blade movies like a week ago. Kind of in preparation for this because I was like, this is the first Marvel vampire movie since Blade Trinity. So I kind of wanted to rewatch those and see how it stacked up. First two Blade movies, still amazing. Um, but the font, like when it did like scene changes and it said the location font on the bottom, what the font they used and like the way it fit on the screen and how it like you could almost tell that someone like copy pasted it on footage or something like that looked so early to they looked so like early Blade movie or like Underworld or something along those lines. And when the movie opened like that, part of me was hoping. I was like, I hope this is bad in the way that it feels like a terrible fourth Blade movie or something.
Hmm.
And then it just wasn't. It was generic. Like it was no Blade Trinity, which you can at least laugh at. But
Yeah, you can't laugh at anything. I think there were jokes in it.
there were attempts. Yeah,
Yeah.
the issue is like if your movie is kind of bad or if you know the concept is campy or cheesy or whatever, like commit to the bit. Like they could have made it a really cheesy movie on purpose, and I think that would have elevated this movie a little bit. But it was the fact that the movie was taking itself so seriously while being so like goofy in so many ways that made it like you can't do those two things at the same time.
Yeah.
Doesn't work.
Yeah. No. Oh, one of the things they cut, or at least from the trailer, I don't know how much they ever wanted to put it in the movie, but was the scene where he like called himself Venom and then goes, "Oh, just kidding. Like I'm Dr.
Yeah.
Morbius." They cut the I'm Dr. Michael Morbius part. And my dad, he just talks through all movies. It's a problem, but he's like, "This is Venom." I'm like, "No, Dad." He's like, I've seen those. I just didn't understand it. I'm like, "Oh no,
No, that's
no, that's not this
amazing. He's like, they made Venom 3 so fat. That's not Tom Hardy.
so
What's
different."
going on? Where am I?
I think with Venom, the reason I feel a little different, like again, I don't love the Venom movies, but I like Tom Hardy enough in it that he like does enough in it for me to be
Well,
like, this is entertaining. Jared Leto, I don't think he's the worst actor ever. I know that people are all over the place on that, but he does some bad things, and he wasn't like the world's worst, but he didn't do anything helpful for the
no.
movie.
Well, he's an actor who relies on the gimmick. Like he even said like in an interview that he thought this role was really challenging because he couldn't method act because he was mostly just doing like playing himself. I mean, obviously he did some like weird method acting with his like crutches and stuff, but in terms of like personality or whatever, like with the Joker, he could go really big on it. And, I mean, it wasn't a good Joker, but still, like he could method act as the Joker, like in a lot of the roles that he's done, or like his Blade Runner role, or whatever. But with this, he was mostly just playing himself, so he couldn't like use the big gimmick to hide like the bad script or the bad like acting or whatever. Like when it was bad, it was just bad, and he can't be like, oh well, you just didn't understand the character I was doing. It's like, no, you were just doing you, man. Like that, like I didn't like it.
Yeah.
That's yeah. The Dr. Michael Morbius thing was like the best part. It was like the meme of the trailer that I loved. I even wore this hoodie in the sense of like I'm Dr. Michael Morbius because like that's just it was so stupid. And I think to your point with Tom Hardy, like it goes back to what I was saying, where like Tom Hardy read those Venom scripts and was like, "This is goofy as hell, and I'm gonna play it like that. Like I'm gonna be goofy as hell. Like I'm talking to like a symbiotic goo that's coming out of my shoulder, and we're arguing like a married couple. I'm going big, and it was great." And Jared Leto went in there and he was like, "I am Dr. Michael Morbius. I save lives. I'm half vampire, and I'm dealing with bloodlust." And you're like, "Geez, dude, like calm down." Like, yeah, like Tom Hardy knew to be silly, and Jared Leto like missed that.
Yeah.
He didn't get it.
Yeah.
Well, in terms of more bias, is there anything else you want to talk about before we start wrapping it up? Anything else you want broken down? As someone who, here's a good question. As someone who hasn't read the comics, were there anything that happened in that movie where you were like, I hope someone could break that down for me? Or like, is that a thing in the comics? Or do you just not care? Because it's totally cool if
Oh,
you
it
just
was
don't
just
care.
so bad. I don't. It's so bad, but it was also. It wasn't just not interesting because it was bad. It was also just like it did feel so generic. So I really never sat there and thought, "Oh, there's something behind all this," and there may be, but like I never felt that way because it just felt like they wrote a name on a piece of paper and wrote like two words on it, and they're like, "You guys go
They wrote three
do your
words,
thing."
and those three
Yeah.
words were Dr. Michael Morbius, comma, at your service. Okay, so I guess with that, this is a movie that we did our best to break down. Um, it's one of those movies that apparently is so bad that we are not even really breaking it down because we're gonna try to forget about it. But I hope everyone watching at home enjoyed even just a little bit. Um, I have been Hunter.
I
This has
have been
been
Mary. Yes.
that has been Mary. Um, watch the movie. Don't watch the movie. We're gonna.
It's probably just a waste of time. Like honestly, that's my advice. Don't watch it. Like you're not gonna be
Yeah.
glad you did. Like I can't imagine a situation for like 99% of people where you're like glad you made that decision. I'm
Well,
not.
with that, we're gonna let Mary end it with that. We're gonna peter out the same way the movie did. Okay, bye.